Hey everyone, Matt here from Doctor Running, and today we're going to do a 150-mile review of the New Balance Fuelcell SuperComp trainer. So this is New Balance Super Trainer, as in the name, okay? It has a full-length carbon fiber plate. It's got a 47 millimeter in the heel, 39 millimeter in the forefoot stack height, so a huge amount of full-length Fuelcell midsole underfoot. Softer ride underfoot, at least, or I would say cushion ride is probably the better term, and we'll talk about why. Midsole, again, has lasted super long. It's been a really good recovery run shoe, an easy run shoe. Not the best for faster running. I can pick the pace up, and it actually does feel good, but just coming in at 11 ounces for men's size 9, it's not really meant for faster running. This shoe has been designed as a training shoe. Totally different, as I mentioned, some of the other super shoes out there. And we talk about this a lot, that some of the things like the Fuelcell RC Elite 2, the Vaporfly, the Endorphin Pro series, the Alpha, a lot of those shoes are really meant as racing shoes. They were designed, the plate design, the foam, the geometry was designed for running faster, not necessarily for running slower. So if you're going to run slower in them, there's some risks you're taking of using a tool for not its intended purpose. The SuperComp trainer, its intended purpose is as a daily training shoe for people that want that super shoe feel without being nearly as aggressive. Now, it's still got a stiff ride because there's no flexibility with that large plate. It's still a very rockered ride because this much midsole and that plate, there's no flexibility. So you need a rockered ride, which overall ends up being a great shoe that's awesome for long runs. Awesome. It can handle a little bit of up-tempo stuff, but like I said, not the best. But amazing for recovery runs, long runs, might even be like almost like a good ultra shoe, maybe, but really meant for roads. I pulled a David and tried a little bit of trail in this shoe. Not the best option for a stack height this high in a shoe that has this much cushioning in it, not necessarily soft, which we'll talk about. But yeah, not the best. And that might be why I tore through the outsole a little bit. I was using it on some solid miles in Welch's, Oregon. So not the greatest idea. In terms of the durability, 150 miles for me is really good. I only took this off, I think, because I scuffed my feet a little bit more. My hamstrings have been really fatigued, and I think that's where this is coming from. For people that follow this know that I typically do this. But this is good. It actually hasn't affected the ride too much. If I land on my heel, yes, I've worn a wedge here, which that's, what happens. But landing further forward, it's totally fine. The ride has maintained over 150 miles. And anybody that's not that hard in the midsole, this shoe is going to last forever, okay? This midsole does not change. It broke in nicely very quickly and gives you this bouncy ride no matter what the pace you're going. Plate has not changed, still has super smooth rocker. It really has maintained its form despite my normal damage to its shoes. And this is actually pretty good considering I do this normally at like 40, 50 miles. So pretty solid there, not too bad. Upper has maintained. It's still a little snug in the forefoot, and it's kind of got this like nice wrap of the foot. Little more room here, a little less room here. Haven't really noticed it that much. It's been kind of a solid training shoe that still also breathes really well. I can imagine that they really need to lighten upper up, given they got to pull the weight down somehow. It's been super comfortable, and I've really, really enjoyed it for recovery runs. I'm still having to get up my forefoot now to avoid this, but although it's been great. Interesting point is that the stability is actually pretty decent at the foot and ankle. So the plate being super wide, the wide platform, the way that this guideline is set up, and these pretty solid sidewalls actually do a great job of locking the ankle, and I was really surprised how stable my ankle felt. Hip, not as much, just because this is not a soft ride. It is very cushioned. It definitely has some softness, but the plate sitting so close to the foot gives it a slightly, it's not a firm, but it's got a more grounded ride. It's maybe not firm. I don't know the word to use, but it isn't firm. It isn't super soft, but it's definitely really cushioned. It's really, really cushioned. Hopefully that makes sense. But I think having the plate a little close to the foot makes it feel like it's not as soft as it might be, which is good because that keeps it more stable underfoot for the foot and ankle. Now, having this much foam underfoot and having a really rockered ride, what does that do? It takes pressure off the ankle and it's going to shift work up toward the hip. So both BJ, our sound engineer, and I had an experience where we tore up our calves during a workout. It's normal, right? You're running in lower drop shoes. You're running really fast. Calves really sore the next day. Had no trouble in this the day afterwards. Kind of feel like, it's like, oh, my calves are fine, right? Because the rocker, the stiffness, you're not going to have to use your calves very much. For people that are more hip dominant, you're going to like this shoe. People that are having Achilles issues, shoes can probably be able to unload that and roll you forwards. Obviously, it's going to depend. You should see a medical professional if you're having that stuff. But it really shifts a lot of the work up higher. So I tend to use a little bit more hip, and that felt great. The only challenge is with these kinds of shoes, yes, it's going to feel good. They're designed for training. They're going to provide a ton of cushioning and that really amazing super shoe feel without being nearly as aggressive. The thing is, there's no such thing as free energy, right? There's work is going to go somewhere. So while there's less work at the ankle with a shoe like this, it's going to go up toward the hip, and that includes the stability. This is similar that I talked about with the Fuelcell RC Elite 2, that a super soft ride is going to make the hip work a lot harder. And I'll explain in another video what I think people can work on training-wise, but that's another thing. Well, I'm actually going to talk about it. So with this kind of shoe, you're not going to have to worry about ankle stability. Ankle's going to be fairly well locked in there. It's not a stability shoe, but it does pretty well. But you do need to have a good stable hip, and that's really important. Why? Because you're running on a very soft and relatively unstable surface, because the midsole is not going to lock the hip in, okay? So what muscles are we talking about when it comes to hip stability? We're talking about the deep hip rotators, so the deep six, and those are kind of like the rotator cuff of the hip. They've got to control a lot of that rotational movement. The glute muscles also help with this quite a bit. Hamstrings, quads, adductor, not great at this at all. So people that have weakness up in the hip can often have strains elsewhere in the tensor fascia lata, which is one of those hip flexors on the front side, common source for IT band stuff. Not that it's going to give you IT band issues. You got to make sure those hip muscles are really stable. That can be something as simple as going, hey, practicing single leg balance on an unstable surface, doing some like hip strengthening work, something along those lines. But you're going to have to make sure you have really strong hips, not just front to back, but also side to side to handle running in a soft shoe like this. And that's what I think people don't realize is they go, hey, I'm going to jump in. My calves don't hurt. I'm good. You just need to be a little bit more thoughtful of going, this is a tool. There are certain good things. There's going to be certain things where it's going to put more pressure. So not necessarily risk, but it's going to put more pressure there. So you just got to be ready, right? There's no such thing as a shoe that's going to keep you injury free. There's going to be things with running being a higher impact sport. Yes, it's going to reduce a lot of the impact here, but you do have things you're going to have to do. When people were really big into minimalist stuff, we had to make sure people had really good calf mobility, really good bone density, had to have really good ankle mobility, still needed good balance at the ankle. Now with these larger shoes, you're going to need much better hip stability, much better hip strength, because that's where the work is being shifted with this stuff. Are these shoes cool? Yes. Is this way more appropriate for training and way more appropriate for a lot of people than a lot of the super shoes? Absolutely, and I'm really happy that New Balance has thrown this out there because, the Prime X was an interesting shoe from Adidas, but that's still really a racing shoe, and I wouldn't say that's the best trainer necessarily, whereas this, it can really handle going slow, and it's still inherently stable at the ankle, that a lot of people are going to do well in this. I think a lot of people who aren't necessarily going, hey, I don't want to try to run as fast as possible, I want to do a marathon or a longer distance race, this shoe's going to be great, even for the average person, right? I don't always say that about some of the super shoes just because of how aggressive they are. If you take your time to build into them, you'll be fine. But something like this, I think is going to reach a much larger group of people. And people that might be nervous in some of the other ones, try it, right? Give it a shot. At $180, that's nuts, by the way. To have this shoe be worth $180, that I would expect that to be like $250, but New Balance, don't listen to that. This is a great price. It's a really good shoe to experience some of this stuff, get a little more balance without having something crazy aggressive that you need to be worried about. That said, if you're going to try something like this, you still need some good hip stability. But it's also a shoe that's going to last you for a while, because if this shoe can last me 150 miles, it's going to last everybody else a really long time.